Hello, everybody. This is Jeff Tefertiller with my son Reese. We are joined by Matt Harmon, the one and only, even though there's many people out in Hollywood with that same name, maybe not even as famous as you are. How you doing, Matt?
I don't know about all that, but I'm doing very well, Jeff. It's a nice little Sunday, almost evening here out in LA, and was busy charting some Keenan Allen before we jumped on here because reception perception season is in full effect. Still plenty of work to do with that, and obviously we got the draft coming up, so it's a fun time here in the football universe, at least.
Oh, yeah. Reception perception with receivers. We both have some questions for you. And
Perfect.
but let's start with you and I go back, I don't know, 6, 8 years, right? Something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so what most people don't realize is Matt's a tall dude. Like we see people, we see him on TV. Matt's a tall dude. Matt's 6'3", 6'4", something like
Yep,
that.
6'3".
And I say that because in LA you must be like a giant, right? Whenever I was in LA or on the East Coast, I felt like I was in the land of the Lilliputans. And I'd go out there and I'd fly into Newark, and everybody's like, the dudes are 5'8", 5'9", 5'10".
Yeah.
And here I am, the jolly, ugly green giant. But anyway, is your girlfriend, is she tall?
No, she is 5'3", so she's like a foot shorter than me, which she just fits nicely right about here. So I can kind of put my chin on the top of her head when we stand near each other. So yeah, no, she definitely a big height difference there. I think she said that she had never dated anybody taller than like 5'6" or 5'7" before me, and I said, well, welcome to the good part of the rest of your life.
Exactly. Exactly. My wife's only 5'6". I'm about 6'5", and so there's a little bit of a
Yeah.
difference there. And what's funny is the young lad here is 5'10", knocking on 6 foot. He just started growing, and my daughter's 5'9", 5'10", and
Yeah.
my wife's, she's got past. And so anyway, all right. So let's talk about this. So Matt, we go back a few years. I know some of your backstory, even the words Lynchville, Virginia. You know, you graduate from Lynchburg, right?
Yeah.
And how do you get from Lynchburg, Virginia, to the ESPYS red carpet in what, 8 years?
I think so. Maybe less than that.
Maybe
Honestly,
less than that.
I graduated in 2013.
Wow,
So
7 years. So you
yeah,
go
yeah.
from
I mean, there's a lot of twists, a lot of lucky
yeah,
turns. I mean, that's everything. I mean, there's luck involved in any good thing. I think that comes your way, but really, I don't know, Jeff. How do I condense that down into a short answer that's good for the airways? But I think that honestly, I think the thing with me was just, I graduated school with like a very clear plan. I wanted to go back to school and pursue a PhD in social theory and sociology, which was what I studied in school. And I really like. I was always. I mean, I'm not like being braggy here, but I'm a pretty smart guy. But I
yeah,
struggled in some school aspects because I have to be passionate about something. Like if I don't care about it, I'm never going to be good at it, because that's just the way I've always been wired. Even when I was like a little kid, I'd find like a movie or TV series that I'd get into, like, 1 month it was Star Wars and it was all Star Wars. And next month it was Lord of the Rings and it was all Lord of the Rings. So I think that's followed me to my adult life. But in school, like that subject it called to me. I loved it and I became really good at it, and had, some programs that were very interested in, bringing me in or whatever. But something, a lot happened in my first year out of school. And I just decided I was in a really tough spot, was struggling a lot mental health wise. And I really just needed to give myself some sort of like passion to take over my everyday life, just to really honestly keep going, honestly. And I decided, I was like, you know what? I love to write. I love football. I love fantasy football. I should just start a website in my free time. And that's when I started Backyard Banter. And I guess, and then from there it was, what if I actually kind of made this a job? Like what if I did something? I don't know how I'm going to do it, because how do you do it? I'm a nobody. I have no league connections. I didn't play in the league. I wasn't a scout. I don't know anybody in the business, period. But it was really just like, okay, if I'm going to stand out in this space and find a job, then I have to do something that no one else is doing. Cause you can go out there and like, I can start doing Matt Harmon's fantasy rankings. Nobody cares. Cause they don't know, they don't, definitely back then they didn't know who this Matt Harmon was. That's for sure. So I decided to pursue reception perception, create that because it was something different. Like, it was the question that I had about the game that no one else was answering. So I wanted to be the one to go and answer it. And then, people started finding me, and it all just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah. So let's back up. There's a few things I want to dig in on. All right.
Okay.
So you graduate college. And I'm going from memory, so you correct me, okay? And so I have one of these typical guy memories. It's selective, but it's good. It's deep in some areas, right? But very selective, if you ask my wife. And so you were working at some behavioral science facility. I don't want to get into details, but I remember it pretty vividly when I met you. And you started writing you went from backyard banter, and you're still doing that some, and you start writing for Football Guys. Mm-hmm. Football Guys has an annual retreat in January in Vegas, and I meet you, right?
Yep.
And so you're right, that had to be like only 6 years ago, because you're probably 6 months to a year out of college. And you go from that, hey, I'm the new kid doing reception, perception, Football Guys, it's all cool. You bring a great energy. People don't know this, but in person, you have a great energy. And so in 6 years, you're in the ESPYs. And what amazing. There's another subplot in there, right? Your weight. And I say that because tall guys can put on, people don't realize this, but if you're tall, you can hold way more weight than people realize. Way more weight. And so what are you down to? You look like, I'm going to guess, you look like you're 210, 215, maybe a little bit lower.
Yep, that's that was my pre-quarantine weight. Let's put it that way. Things are a little bit different here when you're stuck inside and you can't, I used to go to yoga like 4 times a week. My girlfriend's a yoga instructor part-time. Well, was a yoga instructor part-time before all this. And then, we have a gym up the street that we both go to. Like, we're very active. So here in quarantine, it's a little different. We're having to get a little creative. But yeah, about 210, 215, that is that's my usual weight. And that's 100 pounds less than it was at my peak. In my junior year of college, I was 315 pounds, which is, wow. Like you said, I think people looking at pictures wouldn't know that because they probably don't know that I'm like 6'3". So it's definitely different when you're taller. And
you have your frame isn't like my frame. I can hold a lot of weight. And you're going to laugh at this. I go from 250 something down to 215 and nobody says a word.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody says a word. And I'm like, that's 35 pounds. And, and I can't even grow a nice beard like you. And so, it's just one of those things. So so it was in your senior year in college, or or was it your junior? You're like, I'm done. I got to lose the weight.
Well, I think it was definitely my junior year of college when I was 315, like seeing the 3 on the scale is tough, especially because, I like football so much and I played so much Madden that I pretty much knew like every player's like height and weight just by memory. Again, like the stupid stuff that I applied myself to in college when I probably could have been a better student in all the other subjects. That's a trend. But yeah, so I mean, knowing like I was 315, I was like, God, like offensive linemen and defensive linemen weigh like 315 in the NFL. And I don't look like those guys. I look pretty rough. So that was really kind of the point when I started thinking that way, but it wasn't until that same time when I started Backyard Banter, honestly, in the first year out of college, and I was going through a lot at the time, there was just kind of a moment when, I said, like, I'm done. In order to, literally keep going, to kind of save my own life, not only do I need to get right from a mental perspective and, find something like writing about football that I'm really passionate about, it was also like, let me finally make this drastic change and get healthy. And that was when that started. So this is again about 6 years ago now.
Wow. But I mean, it's a big transformation. I mean, even like your psyches, like people don't realize if you're not mentally in a good place, I'm sorry, going off football here, but if you're not in a mentally good place, it's hard to excel at anything. And people don't realize it, because you studied that area. But, when I mentally wasn't in a good place with who I am and what I am, I couldn't excel at things, right? Because
Hmm.
the ceiling was lower that I just couldn't get to. Is that what you feel as well? Like if you were still 315, you would not be able to achieve what you've achieved since.
100%. Like, I think that the way your mental health and your physical health interacts is something that really we don't talk about enough, and we don't tell. I wish I had known more about that, at the time. I just, it's funny too, because I can go back and like pinpoint things in my early life and be like, yeah, that was definitely something that I probably should have had a better handle on or whatever. But yeah, like being able to, when I'm feeling like my physical best, I feel like I'm definitely more confident. And in my job, if you're like on camera or you're on podcasts, like being confident really helps. And just even putting yourself out there, like throwing out a hot take on Twitter or whatever, you got to have a little bit of like confidence and be okay if somebody calls you, some unpleasant things on the internet sometimes.
It happens.
It definitely happens. It's all about putting yourself out there. So I think the confidence, number one, is big, but I also think just, you're right. When you're physically feeling your best, you're sharper mentally. And that's why, like, you can see behind me here, this, like, I got this like very cheap, tiny little exercise bike that I ordered us while we're in quarantine here. And I was like, every morning I want to come up, like get up and at least do like 20 minutes on the bike, in that little rickety thing. And speaking of tall, like I'm almost like just this close to too tall for this tiny thing. So it's definitely, we're making do with what we can, but it helps to just get the brain, get the body moving, to get the brain moving early in the day.
Oh yeah. I started walking just because we live by a park. And I calculate next week, in the quarantine, I will hit mile 100. I'm doing
Nice.
2.83 a day in 4 or 5 weeks. Okay. But just for that mental stimulation, people in the medical field talk endorphins. I mean, this is just walking. This isn't like breaking a sweat. It's just like, got to keep moving. All right. So we covered a lot. You're an inspiration, though, to many, and whether they're this age or my age. And so, we can never be too old for that. So what advice would you give to younger people, whether they're 14, 24, even 84, trying to break into the business? One thing you said that I really want to push in on, and I put this out on LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn person just from my business kind of stuff. People are rewarded for their strengths. And we don't care how well Tom Brady plays golf or LeBron throws a football.
Right.
So your reception perception rewards people for what they do well, right? Like, if I'm going to pick on Henry Ruggs, right? If Henry Ruggs can do 3 routes really, really, really well, he'll be a successful NFL guy.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I actually think I was talking about this with our former colleague, Matt Waldman. Well, Waldman is still with Football Guys. You're still with Football Guys. I'm obviously not anymore at this point. But
obviously, I'm too big for that.
That is not what I meant. But I was talking about this with him on his podcast. Is especially with reception perception, I actually tend to be more positive. Like a lot of people ask me, well, I feel like I know very well, almost too well, the guys that you like, the John Browns, the Allen Robinsons, those type of player. But who do you not like? Who is reception perception kind of telling us is not good? And I just don't really tend to talk about the players that I'm down on more, or like, dog on guys for being bad, because I think part of what I've learned through my journey is like you get out of the world what you put into it. And I try to put as much positive energy into everything I do, to the point that I think that has come back to me tenfold completely. So that's one piece of advice I would always give to everybody. Like, stay positive and let that come out of your work too. People want a release out of this. This is not some sort of, and I think most people subconsciously want to hear more good news than they do bad news. Like, definitely it's fun to joke around every now and again. Like, it's just a game, it's not serious. It's football. Like, we're not out here saving lives or anything. We're just talking about a stupid game. And if you're talking about fantasy, you're talking about a game about a game. Yeah. Like, what is that even? So don't take it seriously, but at the same time, I think putting positive energy into it is key. And I think just talking about even your own individual strengths, like, I think the only reason that I ended up at NFL Network, the only reason now that I'm at Yahoo and that I think I have a pretty, hopefully, fingers crossed, a good career ahead of me, like, is because I did do something different. I sat there and said, like, what is I want to know more about who is the best route runners in the NFL. I want to know about wide receivers and what they're doing when they run off the screen on Sundays when I'm watching games. I don't see anybody out there really answering that in the way that I think it would be best. I'm going to just be that person that does it. So I think finding a hole in whatever field you want to be in and then just be the person to answer that question. Like have a question and then actually answer it for yourself.
Right. And so it's finding the void. But I will tell you what's really interesting is I've been around a lot of people. This is me, like smiling, laughing is me all the time, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
I don't ever say anything negative on Twitter. I don't take positive. Yeah, I'm like, no, I'm not going to go down that, right? Even at fantasy football, like the message boards. But what I was getting at is some people go, Matt, you're too positive. You know, it has to be an act because not everybody can be that positive all the time. And that's not me. I would never say that. But do you ever hear that? Like, come on, man. Can't you just be real with us on this?
No, I think I definitely hear that more on Twitter. I think the people that know me like in real life know that I definitely love to crack on people. You know, like my friends, I love to rip on my friends because they know that they know that I love them. But if I go out there and say something bad about Cooper Kupp, you might not take it the right way. You know, so I think that that's just something in general. Like you decide what you put out there for the world to see too, like on social media and stuff like that. You are presenting a version of yourself, and I think you just want to highlight the best things, right? You know, and
Right.
again, you want to put out there into the world what you want to receive from it. So I definitely, you know, I think it's the right mediums to find too. Like, you know, on podcasts and stuff, I don't mind like, you know, letting loose a little bit more, but it's just about how much you want to put out there from yourself into the world. Because I think anytime you're making content for people, or anytime you're making content not for people, like you're writing letters or whatever to another person, or you're journaling or whatever, like you're putting a piece of yourself out there on page. And again, you just want people to generally like what they see.
Yep. And also, I guess one of the reasons I try to be so positive is I feel like there's the people who are trying to be negative, there's enough of them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
there's plenty of them. There's not very many people that want to be encouraging and uplifting and say, how can I help you, brother? You know what I mean? And especially when we talk mental health, like
Yeah.
this isolation, this is just my view, this isolation is going to have a big toll on some people's mental health. And we don't talk about that very much. We may talk at it, we just don't talk about it. We don't talk, hey, call someone up, how are you really doing?
Mm-hmm.
And really try to help them. That's just my soapbox, because you think about people who are financially struggling, they're single, they're maybe aged, elderly, and we're social beings, and it's tough. All right, let's jump into reception perception. Oh, I have one other question. So on
Sure.
your journey, this one's a great one. You're going to enjoy this. You really hit your growth spurt career-wise. This is my perception. Doing the shows with Maddie Franchise. You
Yes.
guys really hit a groove. I think your star started just going straight up at that time. Do you still keep in touch with him? You guys buds?
Yeah. Yeah. All of us, that group at the NFL, Alex Galhar, Marcus Grant, who's still there, and Franchise, and James Coe, Adam Rank, Patrick Claybon, like we have a little like group chat on Slack. Like it's not an act, like you can just make, like people have Slack chats for like work or whatever, but we just have one. It's like our group chat or whatever. So sometimes I'll be like, when we used to be in the office, I'll be in the office at Yahoo and like on Slack all day, but it's actually just, I'm talking to those guys. So yeah, we all talk to each other literally every day. And I agree, like that point too, when I started doing like the fantasy hipster bits with Franchise, and then MJD was a part of that too.
Yeah.
And Dave Damashek, like that wasn't something that I ever like wanted to do. I didn't really want to play like a character on a fantasy show, but at the same time, it was a way to get the foot in the door. Like when I got to NFL Network, I never thought that I would be doing anything on camera. I was just hired to be like a low level writer editor, but you get into a place like that. And I think another piece of advice I always have for people is like, do the job that you have like valuable. Like I didn't ever think I I never really wanted to be on TV, nor I ever think I was ever going to get a shot to do it. But in one way or another, this was kind of my chance to do it. And then that led to more opportunities. Like I could then, because people tell you, like, this is what people don't know. No one tells you like how to be on TV, right?
Right.
Like I remember the first time I was doing anything on camera, I was like, I don't even know where to look. You know, there's all these cameras and there's a monitor down there. What do I look at? You know,
Right.
it's just, and it's like, just be normal, just be yourself. But people need to see you do it. Like I remember asking a producer at the NFL Network, like, well, how do I get chances at being on TV? And he said, well, we only let TV people on TV. I'm like, well, how do you become TV people? He's like, well, you're on TV. I'm like, you see the disconnect here though? Like, how do you start it? Like, how do you just be it? How do you do that? And then this was just kind of a random way to do it and get in. And then after doing those things and showing like, yeah, you can go on camera and speak, even if you're doing like a bit or a character or whatever, you're comfortable. You're not going to go out there and throw up on yourself or like, you know, forget how to talk
Right.
when doing live, you know, national TV. So I agree. That was definitely a game changer for the rest of my career. Cause then I could go and show a producer and be like, just have me on your show talking football, like being normal, you know, cause I can do that too.
Yeah. And what is Franchise doing nowadays?
He's writing like for content strategy for EA. So he writes about Madden.
Oh,
And that's
awesome.
actually, yeah, it's led our careers to like after we both left NFL Network to kind of collide in different ways too, because like we've remember 2 or 3, I think this was 3 years ago now, when Antonio Brown was the cover athlete for Madden that year.
Yeah.
Seems like 100 years ago now at this point, but he was a cover athlete there. So I was going to interview him, and then Franchise was at the interview because it was kind of through Madden, so we saw each other there. There have been times where we've, like I said, seen each other at different events, or also like have been able to collaborate because we've used Madden sometimes at Yahoo because we're not the NFL Network. We don't have like all the highlight footage rights or whatever. So we've at different times done like preview shows while talking about Madden. So he's been a part of that too. So we still, like I said, we see each other all the time and we talk all the time too.
So the one thing we mentioned height, and this is funny to me, and only because I'm a tall guy. People didn't realize when you all were sitting there that it was like a news anchor type of thing.
Yeah.
Because Matt Franchise is like 5'6", 5'8", something like that, maybe 5'10",
Yeah.
right? And you're a tall dude. He's how old is he? I mean, how tall is he? How tall is he? 5'8".
I think he might be like, I don't know for sure, but he's what people would call a short person.
All right, but you all's chairs are like this just to make you look the same height, and it always make me chuckle because it's like when you watch the evening news, which I don't watch anymore, but you see somebody you see all their waist, and somebody else you only see from here. You know, it's just one of those things. So let's talk about reception perception. Your big break, you did something that nobody ever has done before, and receivers. Did you have a question on that?
How'd you start with them?
Why did you start with receivers? Why receivers?
Great. It's a great question because to me, Reese, it was like it was the most interesting position on the field. Number one, because of that aspect of like, on Sundays, they're one of the positions that you just follow the ball all the time. So I always thought to myself, like, there's so much the wide receiver can't control, in order to accrue production. Like for a wide receiver to get a catch and a yard, so many things have to go right. The ball has to go their way on the play. Like the quarterback has to decide to throw to them. And then of course they have to decide back up actually. Cause in general, like a play call has to have this guy as like the primary read, and if he's not the primary read, then the quarterback has to read to get to him, like second or third read, whatever. So in that sense, he's dependent on the play call. Then he's dependent on the offensive line to give the quarterback enough time to find him the ball. And then then the quarterback has to decide to throw the ball, and it has to be a good pass to get there. So there's so much that has to go right. So what I wanted to do is go in and study the only thing that the wide receiver can independently control, which is his ability to run a good route and get open and present that good target for the quarterback. So again, it was just, I had that question about what was going on there, but also like, it's just a fun position, man, these guys are out there like in this one-on-one duel with the cornerback, if it's man coverage or whatever. And I just found that so fascinating to me. Like, that's such an interesting, like, it's one of the few one-on-one interactions on an actual football field.
Oh yeah, and I even thought of the Randy Moss rookie season, thought of the Randy Moss in '07 when he lit it up with the
Yeah.
Patriots. But I also think of the other side, okay? That is a really good question for a young lad who likes giving his dad grief. But yes,
who doesn't? Okay, I'm 28 years old. I still love to give my dad grief, so that's the way it goes.
He likes to figuratively or literally kick me in the groin as much as he can. But anyway, that's a different story. So I also think that there's, see, now he's really small. There are receivers who have been great route runners, but we didn't appreciate them because they were in bad systems or with bad quarterback play. And so fantasy has so many more variables when we start looking at fantasy for somebody to be awesome. Let's look at Diggs. I know you're a Diggs loving kind of guy, right?
Yes.
You dig some Diggs. He going from Cousins to Buffalo may not be as advantageous in Buffalo as it was in Minnesota, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because for fantasy, it's like it's a similar situation, but the quarter, like, it's a run heavy offense. He'll play with another really good receiver, just like he did in Minnesota. John Brown is in Buffalo. I'm a big John Brown fan, so that's a guy that's a guy who had over 100 targets last year. So he's playing on a run heavy team with another really good receiver that's going to command volume. And there's a questionable quarterback there, but not in the same way, right? Because Cousins is the guy who will he's accurate and he's usually on time, but he doesn't always pull the trigger. Josh Allen is like the opposite of that. He's always willing to pull the trigger. It just isn't always accurate or on time. Right. So it's like it's a questionable quarterback, but in a different way.
So Cousins is ready, aim, fire.
Take the check down.
Yeah, and Allen is ready, fire, aim. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And plus, the other thing with Buffalo,
I might steal that from you, Jeff.
You can just give me a little bit of attribution. Yeah. The Buffalo every year or two loses a couple of games fantasy wise because of bad weather too, that we never talk about. You know, that because it's snowing, we can't really get the ball to the receivers very well. You know, and it happens every year or two because you have home games up there, all that fun stuff. So let's talk about some reception to reception. This is your crown jewel and your hat turned around backwards. So, right, all right.
Exactly.
Let me back up. I got two. I think good questions for you. First of all, who were you the most starstruck with in your journey that you met? And you're just like, oh man, I can't believe that I met so and so. Who was it?
I think that's a good question because at some point you don't really get starstruck anymore. And I think I almost had an advantage like working at NFL Network because before I was even ever, quote, important enough to like interview players or talk to like active guys, you're walking the halls every day with like literal NFL legends. Like when you guys visited me at the NFL Network, like we just ran into Willie McGinnis, you know, like
I saw that picture.
Player.
Dude,
yeah.
Right, people may laugh at me or not, but dude had such a strong chest that he needed one of those Seinfeld level bros because he was so. I mean, he was jacked in that picture. He took a picture next to a young lad here, and I still.
And by the way, like when LeVar Arrington was there just for like a hot second when I started. He makes Willie McGinnis look like a tiny fella because he's so barrel chested and everything. Like LeVar was ripped. I mean, just like Marcus used to say that the buttons on like his shirt must have been just like screaming for a release because they were just ready to pop, you know? Yeah. So I think there was like an advantage there because like my first day, like I went into the cafeteria as Nate Burleson is coming out and he like held the door open and I was like, oh, that's so crazy. Like, you know, so I mean, I think by the time like I was actually starting to talk to players, like to interact, to like get to know some of them, there wasn't really almost like any level of starstruck. I mean, I definitely think the first time I talked to Allen Robinson in person, like that was my first ever player interview. I was like, okay, I really want to nail this because like I like this guy so much. He already knew who I was at that point. Like we already had a little bit of a relationship, so I was like, I don't want to come off like a total weirdo, here at this point.
He's a bright dude. People don't realize. People look at these athletes and we paint with such a big brush, and we see the 3% that get in trouble without realizing that 50% came from bad backgrounds that none of us can even fathom. And they don't realize that how articulate, how bright some of these guys are. You know what I mean? And is that fair? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think too, I think football in general, it has a problem with like I don't think the league is as good about like showcasing personalities as I think other leagues are. I think it's like not even really like a woke take or like a high-minded thing to say anymore, that because like basketball players and baseball players don't wear helmets, like they're just more recognizable. Like I'm telling you, man, like you can go to like when I was at the Super Bowl or at the draft, like you could be walking past like a bunch of football players and you wouldn't even know who half of them are. Cause like we just don't, especially like with fantasy, like we get pretty familiar with headshots cause they're on the screen, but like a lot of the defensive players, like I remember being at the ESPYs cause they're like in normal like suits and stuff. Like I know like Trey Burton walked past me one time, like Nick Foles walked past me. I was like, I didn't even recognize either one of those guys, and like they just won the Super Bowl like 5 minutes ago. So I think I do think that the league is not as great at showcasing these personalities as they could be. But yeah, like so many guys, and Robinson's a great example. And I always talk about Derrick Henry. Like those two guys are probably the nicest players I've ever talked to. Like especially Derrick. Derrick is super kind, and I've gotten to talk to him a couple of times. But yeah, Robinson at the Super Bowl, like again, similar situation. He was coming out of the main convention center, and I was going into it. And he stopped me and said like hi, and like we talked and just like had an off the record. He wasn't one of my interviews that day, but like we just had a little off the record normal conversation, like how things are going. Talked about that time that Chris Collinsworth said he'd be like the third receiver on the Chiefs or whatever. We had a laugh about that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys I think that we don't get to know them as much as like we could, and sometimes then even when they're in media or doing interviews, there's a little bit of like a guardedness. So you appreciate the guys that really kind of come out of their shell a little bit, for sure.
So I do want to give Matt props. He did show Reese and I around. Marcus was really, really kind to your buddy Marcus.
Yep.
But so on Nate Burleson, did you ever ask him when he broke his arm and the pizza fell on the floor? That story?
There are many things that you learn not to ask. I think the biggest fear I have and I feel like I'm lucky that I haven't done it yet, but like obviously Nate wasn't like an interview or whatever, but whenever I'm talking to a player, I'm always like, okay, I'm not going to ask this or I'm not going to ask that. Cause like, you don't want to upset him and then like ruin the entire interview or then any further like relationship that you can have from there, because I think that's just like the worst thing that you could probably do. So I don't think I'd ever ask. Like, and a lot of times too, like producers will always want you to get like they don't, not necessarily like a sound bite, but like breaking news or whatever. Like my buddy John Nichols, who covers the NBA for us at Yahoo, like he had his first like player interview, and he said it like didn't really go well. Like I think he was talking to Kyle Kuzma from the Lakers, and this was like right after Anthony Davis had gotten traded. And he's like, yeah, I asked him a lot of questions about Anthony Davis, but he didn't really want to talk about it. He wasn't. And I was like, well, yeah, man, because football players are just like, I mean, athletes are regular people, and what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about yourself and stuff you care about, right? And Anthony Davis that's not Kyle Kuzma, and he probably doesn't care that much because he might not even know the guy or whatever. So but it's like a thing the producers wanted him to talk about because it was breaking news. It was on the topic. So I think like, yeah, you got to learn like what to ask and like what might get them to open up.
I just remember that Burleson story, but I do want to make sure I talk about your kindness. The other question I think is you kind of touched on, but who's been the coolest low key guy that nobody would ever think this guy's a really, really good dude, that you've interviewed, that you've met?
That's a good question. And I think that the Derrick Henry one, like I talked to him before last year's draft because it was in Nashville, and like just randomly his like PR person hit me up, and like which is not normal. Like I set that interview up. So he was like, I was surprised by like how nice he was. And this was like when he obviously like he led the NFL in rushing last year. Everybody kind of knows who he is now, but like he wasn't he's a pretty popular player, but was coming off that big like end of season run in 2018. So that was cool to like see like, oh yeah, he's this like super nice, like very, very cool guy. I was not expecting that. And then I think who's like a really cool guy. I was surprised. Odell Beckham surprised me in terms of like how cool of a guy he was. A little bit difficult to get to the place, but that's pretty standard. I think but probably the coolest one was DeAndre Hopkins. Like I didn't expect him to be. I thought he was going to be a little bit more closed off, but like he was one who was really interested in like asking me about reception perception. Like what is it? What do you do? Like, and then we talked about like diets and stuff like that. He was a cool guy, very open. And then like crazy that, a month later, Bill O'Brien trades him.
Well, especially when you hear that Michael, I don't want to get into it, but that Michael Irvin story about that just cuts me to the heart.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is a disconnect between culture, right? I mean, that's a culture disconnect by O'Brien saying, I want my players to have this kind of personal life, and all we really care about is, are they good, dude, and do they play well, right? I mean, are they a good human being, and we care about them on the field? You know what I'm saying? Like the other stuff. Anyway, I don't want to go down that road. We will stay positive in that. Let's talk reception perception. Do you have a question?
Who's the first wide receiver that you hit on that really showed up?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely Allen Robinson for sure. That was the thing that like, and I remember telling him that too the first time I met him. I was like, I think I like need to thank you for actually like being good this year, because I hyped you up so much, and then if like you hadn't gone out and led the NFL in touchdowns, I probably wouldn't be as like. I think that gave reception perception a lot of like credibility. But I think the one that probably my favorite hit that people don't care about as much was Michael Crabtree coming off when he left San Francisco and went to Oakland. People pretty much like had kind of left him for dead because he'd had all these injuries, and like he was playing with Colin Kaepernick when Kaepernick kind of started to decline, especially like an anticipatory passer. Like there's this funny thing too. Like I realized this past year, honestly, like I spend so much time with these wide receivers, like watching them, that inherently you're spending a lot of time with the quarterback too. And I think you learn a lot about a quarterback based on which wide receivers work with them and who they like to throw to. Like I think you can learn a lot about Jared Goff by watching him play with Cooper Kupp and how much he likes to play with Cooper Kupp. There's a lot that you can learn there. And with Kaepernick, it's just like he worked with the guy like Anquan Bolden, who is not like a timing separation route runner. Whereas that's what Crabtree does really well. So I was like him going, I think if he goes to another team, like in a timing based offense, like a West Coast offense that the Raiders had, I think he would kind of have a career rebound. And he had a couple really good years with Oakland. So I was pretty proud of that hit.
So let me see this. I haven't researched this, but let me name off some of your successes. All right. We won't talk about too many of the failures.
Yeah. Let's talk about those successes.
Tyler Lockett, Smokey Brown, Allen Robinson. Am I still going pretty well?
Yes.
Diggs was one, and you had who was last year's rookie? You liked a rookie last year, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, last year was like the three that I really liked were Marquise Brown, DK Metcalf, and AJ Brown.
Yeah, which is pretty good. Pretty good hit rate, especially if Hollywood is more healthy this year and the Ravens don't draft someone else. It's interesting. You mentioned like the two Ole Miss receivers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the same thing happened with Beckham and Landry. When there's two, we kind of discount it. In the fantasy community, we can't say that they're both good or whatever. We just can't. But Metcalf and Brown, AJ Brown had probably two of the best rookie seasons coming from the same college as any two that I can remember.
Yeah, it's funny. Like you look at the last two draft classes, like this is supposed to be the year of the wide receiver here in 2020. Like this is supposed to be a very good class, a lot of depth, two good guys up top. But you look at the results from the last 2 draft classes, they've been really good. Like DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton in 2018, even Michael Gallup had 1,000 yards last year. That's another player that I really liked coming out of college that I expected to hit, and he had a good season last year. Then you look at last year's draft class. You've got Deebo Samuel, Marquise Brown, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin. Like those 5 guys all look like they're going to be really good and potentially like compete to be top 30 receivers in fantasy. Like this is another reason, Reese, why I like this position so much is because there's so many good players that I think we almost like overlook guys at certain times because, and especially now is an exciting time to be talking about wide receivers because like everybody's playing 3 wide receivers at once, like it's a more important position than ever to not just have like there's so many receiver cores like Minnesota, the Denver Broncos, I think, the Green Bay Packers, like they have one good guy and then like complete, holes on their roster afterwards.
Jets. And I don't even.
Well, Jets don't have. I mean, Jets have Crowder, who's like a pretty good slot receiver, and then
Perriman.
It gets rough.
Yeah, Perriman or whatever. And so I was also. We had recently I talked to Ryan McDowell a couple of days ago. You know Ryan. Ryan told me that you and I share an affinity for another rookie receiver this year, a guy from USC, Michael Pittman. And to me, Pittman looks like Ryan said, I hear him compared to Michael Thomas. To me, he looks like Alshon. Just a physical guy. He runs really good routes. He has good hands. You know what I'm saying? And people discount him. Because the thing about Alshon is we see him at this stage in his career, but Alshon's been a really good receiver for a lot of years. And who do you compare Pittman to?
We're going to keep bringing up Allen Robinson, but that was my comp for him because big wide receiver that can win at the catch point, can win downfield, but I think is very underrated as a technician. Like you see Pittman has a good release move. He has several routes that he's very, very good on. And I think that was like back in 2015, Robinson was the guy who had, a high yards per catch, what was obviously good at winning 50-50 balls, but what I think people didn't know as much about him until hopefully they looked at reception perception was to see that like he was really a star level route runner like right away in the NFL. And I think Pittman pretty similarly like could go in round 2 of this class, just like Robinson went in round 2. Wasn't even the first wide receiver the Jags drafted that year. It was Marquise Lee, who is like really still not that good.
Is he still with them?
And I think so. I think he's still with them. So like, I think Pittman could be pretty similar. Like drafted in round 2, some guys go ahead of him that are a little questionable, and he's going to end up outperforming them because I think he has the tools to develop into a number 1 wide receiver eventually.
And so I'm going to get into my bias here in just a second, okay? I think that looking at breakout rate, age and some of that, we don't have a big enough sample size come for the call. So you're on wide receivers. It also helps that the NFL has changed the rules to be more advantageous for receivers of late. Fair?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. But us looking at breakout age and comparing Pittman to Brian Edwards isn't fair. You know what I'm saying? Because Brian Edwards hit his when he's 17, where, even like Pittman, he had a true freshman quarterback this year because the incoming sophomore got hurt, JT Daniels. Daniels was a freshman the year before. Before that, he had a coaching change. You know what I mean? Like, there's reasons that we can look at that maybe he didn't put up the gaudy numbers that we think he could. Does that seem fair? Like, people want to make it analytical, and I'm great with that, but there's no, like, the sample size isn't big enough for us to make definitive statements. You think that's fair?
I think that's fair with pretty much everything. And even with something like reception perception, I always tell people, like, there's no one skeleton key metric that unlocks everything. No one piece of data tells the entire story. And I think that's just important to remember with everything. And I think things like breakout age and, market share and stuff like that, like, they're really good to help us like filter out players. There are some guys that, maybe you're not like you weren't productive in college and you're not very athletic at the combine. You're probably not going to be a good NFL player. Or the odds are very much against you. So I think those things can definitely help be filters, but nothing is like a full-on eliminator.
But even Ruggs, right? Ruggs is the one I always bring up. He played with some pretty good receivers, When he was a freshman, Ridley was there. Now he has Judy, who's a very good technician, and Waddle and Smith are still back in Alabama. Should we judge him the same way by the same measure that we do? I bring up Brian Edwards because he broke out at 17. He's still very young, and he's a good player. I'm not dogging him. I'm just saying that these situations are very different, and we haven't seen very many situations like Alabama. Derrick Henry, look at the backfield he played with at Georgia. It's hard to compare market share with he and Josh Jacobs and some of those guys in the same way. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I think that's totally like if Henry Ruggs went to Florida or whatever, he would probably produce completely differently. I think it's a situational thing, and I think with anything, I mean, like I'm full on like I think the league could be more forward thinking with analytics, and I think that a lot of people who talk about football should be more interested in combing through data and using analytics and everything like that. But at the same time, like watching a player play, watching them operate in the environment that they are operating in is important too. And I think you have to use a mix of everything, I think, whenever you're breaking down players, especially in the NFL draft.
And wide receivers. And so, like, Reese and I dig everything that Warren Sharp writes because he does great job. I mean, great job. But, you mentioned Crabtree going from San Fran to Oakland. He broke out partly in that year because he went to an offense that was advantageous to his skill set, right?
Yep.
And so we have these variables that are hard to quantify, very hard to quantify. Ruggs with his beloved Broncos would do different than Ruggs with, I say, Lions because I have a Berry jersey above, right? Those are different. It's hard to quantify. What other rookies you like?
Oh, man, this is definitely a fun class for sure. My favorite guy in the draft is definitely CeeDee Lamb. Like, I think I like him a little bit better than I like Jerry Jeudy, but just because I think he's able to do everything. I think Jeudy is a great technician and like an unbelievable route runner for a college player. Like the way he integrates advanced parts of route concepts and breaking everything right. And especially he just times everything perfectly. That's very rare to see from a college player, but I think CeeDee Lamb is just so great after the catch. I think he's very underrated as a route runner, and at the catch point, I really think if someone's going to be like an elite top 8 receiver in the league from this draft, I think he's got the best shot at it. I think definitely I like Denzel Mims a lot, and then I think also, like I said, there's just so many fun players, but Justin Jefferson really jives really well with what I like too. A timing separation player that I think can play inside and outside. Like those guys, I always really like.
Right, and Jefferson, that LSU team had a lot of stars, and when you were back on the East Coast, you kind of followed the Panthers and the Redskins, right?
Yeah, unfortunately for the second one.
All right. But what I was going to say is I don't think people give the Matt Rule, Joe Brady combo enough love. Because whether you love Teddy Bridgewater or not, what Joe Brady did to LSU, we have to give him credit. We have to give him that credit. I don't know if you agree with that. Turned Joe Burrow around. We really didn't know who Justin Jefferson or CEH were. You know what I mean? And now look at them. We're like, hey, these guys are stars. And so the same with Lincoln Riley. You look at Lincoln Riley's taken how many cast-off quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, and turned them into something.
Jalen Hurts too.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts. I just mean, some of these guys do it better than others, and we have to make sure we acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think for sure. And I think the Joe Brady offense in Carolina is going to be really interesting because I think that receiver core is underrated. DJ Moore is a good player. I really like Curtis Samuel. He's like but the next one I'm hoping to be a hit on this list. And I think that's another great, we talked too about the quarterback relationship with wide receivers. And I think you watch the 2019 Panthers and you see that they don't have a very good quarterback in Kyle Allen, especially not deep throwing outside the numbers. That's a perfect quarterback for a guy like DJ Moore, who's so good on digs, slants, those short in-breaking routes that a bad quarterback is going to feed a player's production like that. And then a guy that they were running on too many deep routes, like Curtis Samuel's going to suffer because it's just not a good fit with the quarterback. But I think Teddy Bridgewater can be a really interesting like distributor. And then they also added Robbie Anderson this year, who's, going to be pretty fun on like those crossing routes and stuff like that. Teddy might not go hit him on a bunch of 9 routes or anything like that. He's never been that type of guy, but you can get a player like that in space. That's pretty exciting.
And it opens up for McCaffrey and Ian Thomas. It just struck me how much love it must be in your heart to see the Panther regime of Rivera, Kyle Allen, move from one of your teams to the one that you kind of.
I mean, I could not like care less about Washington.
I know.
I just was from the area, so like I mean, I do not know how many times I watched Jason Campbell check down to Mike Sellers in the flat.
Right.
That was a tough era of Washington football. So, it's rare. I think that Rivera's a good hire for them because like he's kind of the adult in the room who can go and kind of clean up what's been a bad culture hopefully he does that. That's the idea. But like running back the entire 2019 Panthers does seem like a questionable decision considering how that franchise ended this year.
Yeah. And then signing all these average running backs, that's a different story. And so, I'm similar. I grew up Oklahoma, grew up liking the Cowboys. Now I'm not a Jerry Jones fan. I have a son. He always likes to jab me about it. But, like with the Josh Brent situation, the Greg Hardy situation, it's hard to say, yes, young lad, this is the team I want you to anchor your hopes on. And I want you to be more like these guys and make decisions like these guys. And those individual players, I'm not holding it against them. I'm just saying, as an owner, you're saying I'm putting their talent above the culture I want to have. And that's, as a dad with a young lad, that's not really me.
Yeah.
And so, all right. So let's talk veterans. All right. You said Curtis Samuel. Is he your biggest miss so far?
I mean, I think it's too early to say it's like a miss, because like I definitely like calling him, because it's funny too, because you brought up Tyler Lockett, but like I called that Tyler Lockett was going to break out in 2016. And that didn't happen really until like 2017, 2018.
Right.
Like we eventually saw how good Tyler Lockett was, but like, back like during the 2016 season, I was getting dogged all the time for like saying Tyler Lockett should be his big breakout receiver because people thought he wasn't good because he was, like the third option on his team and he was getting hurt all the time. Then he gets healthy. He's the number one option. Like he's had 2 great seasons back to back in terms of like just overall statistical efficiency. So sometimes it takes a while with these guys. I'm hoping that Samuel is the same way.
But not only that, they can be statistically good and their team value them and them not be that great for fantasy. And that's all good. You know what I mean? Like Samuel could do a great job, be the third receiver in Carolina, and his coaches love him because of the technical abilities. But we in the fantasy world just go, like those are still okay outcomes, right?
Yeah. I think sometimes I can get a little carried away. And so maybe this was a situation when I got a little carried away. We'll see how it goes.
Oh, you have another question for Mr. Harmon here?
As Samuel's not your biggest miss, who is?
Who is my biggest miss? I think you can go from a couple of different ways on this. Like, there's definitely been players that I thought weren't going to be good that did end up being good. Like, for example, trying to think about like a player like Juju Smith-Schuster, I thought was not going to be productive because like I didn't think he could beat. This is a funny thing too, Reese. Like, learning from your mistakes is the most important thing. And like with your dad was talking about like sample sizes and stuff like that. Like I remember the early days of reception perception. Like I said a lot of things that I definitely wouldn't say now, because now I have 6 years worth of data. Like I know what matters more than others, but I definitely thought like Juju was not going to be that good coming off of his rookie season into his second season. And he had 1,600 yards or something. So that was probably the biggest whiff. I definitely think his job got a lot harder last year without Antonio Brown, and obviously Big Ben was hurt, but definitely he's a player that I didn't give enough credit to.
Another guy I like on that team is Deontay Johnson.
I want to look at him. So,
yeah. Let me know. Tag me. Let me know because when I see him run routes. So like recently, I like Oklahoma State, right? And so everybody thinks, oh, you like James Washington and Mason Rudolph. No, not necessarily. I think Washington's an athletic beast, but when I watch Deontay Johnson, I see a guy that gets open,
Yeah.
and the guys that get open are the ones that get my attention,
I agree.
because coming out of out of college, the guys who can't separate, but then they can still jump up over someone coming out of college, I avoid those guys in fantasy only because the NFL D-backs are so much better. And if you can't separate in college, you really can't in the pros. So anyway, that's a different story. So who's your veterans this year?
I don't know that I've like found one guy that I think is like I'm gonna really tout as like the next big breakout just yet, because just with the nature of reception perception and it coming out June 1st, like I have to kind of focus on the top guys right now, and then I start like kind of working my way down the ladder. But some guys that we talked about him earlier, but like Marquise Brown's a guy that I think could have, if everything breaks right, could have like a big year this year, because I think he's like in college, I thought he was, obviously everyone knows how fast he is, but like he was underrated as a technician too. Like very good detailed route runner that I think like it's crazy that Lamar just had the passing efficiency season that he did, and like Hollywood Brown wasn't popping for all 16 games. Like that's definitely a guy that I think could break out this year.
And he was, he's probably only going to be fully healthy this offseason.
Exactly.
Like people discount him. Now, could the Ravens draft a round 2, round 3 receiver? Sure, but that cupboard was pretty empty. So it's not like, at least I don't think the Ravens have that much depth at the position.
No, I like Miles Boykin, their other rookie receiver from last year, but like, it's like pretty much Brown, Boykin, and Willie Snead. And then like it's nothing after that. So they could definitely add. I don't think they'd take one in round 1, but there's a lot of fun possibilities if they take one in round 2 or 3.
Right. Since you like clinicians at the position, do you like Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods? Do you like those guys, Keenan Allen?
Yeah, well, Keenan Allen's like, I think when you talk about the best route runners in the NFL, to me it's Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams. Obviously, Antonio Brown's not in the NFL anymore, but he would have been up there prior to this past year. And then I think it's – who's the other guy that's slipping my mind? Odell Beckham, like when he's healthy, like he was one of the best route runners in the NFL. But I don't know if he was healthy last year. It was just one of the worst seasons I've ever – it's the only like bad season I've ever charted for Odell like in the NFL since he's been there. Like other than that, he's like up at like, the 98th percentile in terms of like success rate versus man coverage and reception perception. So it's pretty much like if you're arguing who the best route runners in the NFL are, if your answer is not Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Michael Thomas, or Devontae Adams, I think you're kind of wasting your time.
Well, and what's interesting about those guys weren't that known for it coming out. Diggs was what, a 4th, 5th rounder pick.
Yep.
Allen, 2nd round maybe?
3rd, I think.
2nd, 3rd. Beckham kind of was. Brown, Antonio wasn't. And I actually, what were you saying?
OBJ was 12th overall.
Yeah. See, he knows all this. People don't realize this because he and I talk, but Matt knows, the young lad knows his football.
Yeah, he knows his stuff.
Yeah, he does. But I think Brown's coming back this year. So just get a test. We have not done this before. Matt, we're going to play a little Super Bowl 1-question trivia with the young lad, okay?
All right.
Matt, what year were you born?
1991.
Tell me about the 91 Super Bowl.
Redskins beat the Bills 37-24. Mark Rippon was the MVP. And the Redskins got a big lead, but then they kind of quit playing and let the Bills come back in a little bit.
Who were some of the best players for the Bills that year?
Kelly, Reed, Thurman.
So of the games that the Super Bowls that the Bills lost, which one was that? Was that the
second?
The second.
The Bills. I knew the answer. The only reason, if you would ask me any other year, I would never. Number one, I would never been able to go in that kind of detail. But even the only reason I knew who won the '91 Super Bowl is because my roommate in college was a big Washington fan. His name was Evan, and he's still one of my best friends to this day. But he was my freshman roommate in college, and he's like, yeah, I root for Washington, but like they haven't had a Super Bowl since I was 1 year old, like the year we were both born. So yeah, it's a tough scene.
All right, watch this even further. Who are the coaches of those teams?
Marv Levy and Joe Gibbs.
Mark Levy, Joe Gibbs. Who were the backup quarterbacks? Do you know either of those?
Who's the guy? Frank Reich was the backup for the Bills.
Yeah. What's he doing now?
Coaching the Colts.
Yeah. So these are the conversations in the Tefertiller household.
Girls love it.
Yeah, the girls.
Oh yeah.
They're not really digging it too much. And so anyway, I just have one more question. So we talked about like building on your strengths, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about Marquise Brown really, doing well. Keenan Allen doing well. Who in one of the strengths is like off the charts that we never would have thought of on reception perception? Like who like beats the zone and nobody ever thinks about him or what?
That is a great question. And I got the spreadsheet open right here because I've been doing some work. I think a player that we kind of forget about, and it's interesting because I was just tweeting out my Jerry Jeudy article today, and someone replied like, I think when you look at like if you look at the top level guys in reception perception, like all of them are good players, right? Like Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown when he was in the league, Stephon Diggs, like DeAndre Hopkins is up there, John Brown is up there. John Brown, I think, before this past year didn't get enough credit, but then he goes out and like has 1,000-yard seasons with Josh Allen and the Bills. Yeah. But the guy that pops in there that I think is pretty random that like people forget about was Stevie Johnson. Like back when his LA or like I think it was his 2014 season with the 49ers and like the Bills before then too. Like that there was a guy that at his time was one of the really good route runners, but he was like a weird route runner. Like he kind of improvised a lot. So it's like it makes sense that with a quarterback like Ryan Fitzpatrick, he had a couple of good years because Fitzpatrick is kind of that gunslinger random quarterback. So that's one guy that like when you look at the logs of reception perception, like some of the best players in terms of beating man coverage, like it's all these stars, some guys that are popular in the league now, and then like Stevie Johnson, I forgot about him.
Yeah, I like Stevie Johnson. I mean, there's been a lot of really good receivers come through. You mentioned Lockett. The other Kansas State receiver that I thought was really good when I watched him was Jordy Nelson on routes. Saw him. K-State played KU random Saturday afternoon. Saw him torch Aqib Talib, and I was like, "Hey, that boy's pretty good." Because Aqib Talib was good at the time as well.
First players reception perception results that I ever published was Jordy Nelson's on Backyard Banter. That's the first ever. I don't keep it in the database anymore because the metrics slightly changed to include some other things. Like that was his 2013 season, and the only ones that I like keep logged in the database are 2014 and on. So, but the first reception perception article was on Jordy Nelson. And
people don't realize how good he was. Is all I was trying to get at.
Oh yeah, I agree.
When he torched Talib, just torched him in college. I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
I don't. Do you have any other questions for Mr. Harmon? Do you have any questions like how he can grow such a cool beard and your dad can't, or why? All right, here's a great question. So my hair is a little shaggy. Same with his. You getting haircuts during this time, or are you just wearing hats more?
No, I'm not getting. You can't get a haircut. Everything is closed, and that's rough because I was at a point where I was getting like at least the sides buzzed like every month or every 3 weeks or something like that. So I'm by the end of this, I'm gonna be looking weird. I did say to my girlfriend, I was like, I'm gonna let the beard. It used to be pretty long. Like I think back maybe when you guys came to the NFL, and definitely when I was doing Fantasy Hipsters, it was much longer. And then I shaved it all off, and I was like, well, I'm never doing that again because I look terrible with like a clean shaven face. But now I just keep it a little shorter. But I said because it looks much better. It was terrible when it was long, and like I'm glad that I can admit that now. So when I said, I was like, as long as we're in quarantine, I'm not gonna trim my beard. And I lasted like 2 weeks, and I was like, I look terrible. I'm shaving it now. Yeah, it looked terrible.
Yeah, I can't grow one. So, I'm just glad I'm on one end of the spectrum or the other. Like either have a full beard the whole time, Duck Dynasty style, or can't grow one. shave once a week and be fine. You know, I mean, like
There
I'm
you go.
good one end of the spectrum or the other. Well, Matt, thank you very much for joining us and the young lad and telling us how you got into this business. It is a cool story, very inspirational, and one that, you know, there is opportunity. You know, like I'm an optimist, right? There is opportunity. There's opportunity everywhere for those that do a good job, work hard, see a need, try to fill it, not try to be. What I heard you say a few times is, you know, part of my success was I wasn't trying to have the 18th best ranking. You know, I mean, like I was trying, you were trying to do something that wasn't being done. Is that reasonable?
Yep, for sure.
And so thanks for joining us. And the young lad appreciates it. So does his old man.
My pleasure, guys. It was totally fun to talk to you. And yeah, we could have gone on like any of these one subjects for like 5 hours. So I'm glad I'm glad we got to chat, and I appreciate it. I'm glad we still keep in touch, Jeff.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
See ya.